All right. All right. Welcome, Other Life Podcast, baby. Welcome, all of you Quirked Up Whodies and BPD art chicks and Republican art fag socialists. All are welcome. All are welcome. Other Life Podcast, the best podcast on the internet. I'm here with my buddy Barrett Abner from the Contain podcast. My buddy Barrett here, who I met in LA about 1 year ago, I've managed to convince him to come to Austin. Well, actually, he was going to do it on his own. We kind of, compared notes and both decided, fuck it, let's go to Austin. And Barrett just arrived a couple days ago, and we got my boy Ben also off camera helping me with the technical assistance. Thanks, Ben. Ben and Barrett are both here in Austin, and I connected them so they're sharing a house together. So we're building the crew. We're building the whole crew in Austin. It's pretty dope. And this is the first time having them over my place on the Other Life podcast. And actually, this is the first time you're doing my podcast ever, right? You haven't been on it.
I did one with Alex and Wang Young.
Oh, that's right. We did do that in LA.
LA. But that was almost like an auxiliary, weird late night drunken excursion. So it was interesting though. It was good.
Yeah, hell yeah. So if you're here for the first time, please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. And folks, you have to click the little bell after you subscribe. That's going to make sure you get notifications whenever I go live. And look, I built this badass in-home studio. I'm going to be doing a lot more cool live streams. So do subscribe real quick before you forget and click the bell. And I also want you to go check out Barrett's podcast. It's called the Contain Podcast. We put some links in the show notes. So go check out Barrett's stuff. It's quite interesting. If you think Other Life is kind of weird and surreal, you're gonna, if you're into that aspect of the Other Life podcast, then you should definitely go check out Barrett's podcast, because it basically takes if you think Other Life is kind of surreal and weird, it takes that aspect and goes full throttle with it much more than I do. So yeah, if you're into that aspect of Other Life, you'll definitely like the Contain podcast. And that's about it. Let's get right into it then, shall we? So what do you think so far? You've been in Texas for what, a few days?
Yeah, I got here 3 days ago. So I mean, as soon as I got here, it felt pretty good to me, honestly. It felt like I was like, oh yeah, this is probably a good move. What do I think about it? I mean, it's so hard to tell, because when you're driving in, you see like the tree lines, and there's all these like gnarled, grizzled trees, and I get a lot of inspiration from like decrepit canopy. So that was a positive note. But then you see like the skyscrapers, like, oh, this looks like any other shitty like major city, but come to find out, it's actually great here. So I love it.
Because you were not happy in LA. You were particularly kind of hating it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was pretty draconian.
How would you summarize the situation in LA?
Oh, it was kind of like, it was like a John Carpenter movie or something like that. It was really like, it felt like Escape from LA with like Snake Plissken and like and obviously that's like kind of like a pussy over exaggeration of the whole thing. But there is this sort of like oppressive micro fascism that just kind of, it's like poor management of things. It's really sort of restrictive culturally. And I liked it before the whole coronavirus thing, because that's where we did the event. And I was having a good time, but there's always I always knew that it was on the precipice. It just was like one recession or any sort of like, hitch would just like completely destroy that place. And now it's like uninhabitable, and you can't even you'd think that would bring cost of living down, and it hasn't at all.
So you once described yourself as, you said to me that you're a Republican art fag socialist. And I think about that all the time, thinking to myself, what the fuck does that mean? And that was going to be the first question I wanted to ask you, is please explain to me and my audience what that means.
I think, I came up with that term before people had been sort of like throwing around this word post-left. And post-left is basically, I would say, like it's kind of like, I think most people know what it is now, because they think of like Amy Therese or Red Scare or like any of these people. But to me, it was like, I could see the writing on the wall that like eventually you would find the left be drifting more towards this kind of like, as you could say, the other side got more entrenched in kind of like technocratic modalities, and things just looked very corporatized. It's like people would aesthetically relate to that. The framing would just be off for like a certain constituency of like cool, cultured, interesting people, and that they would eventually join the other side. And it's funny because it's like anytime Dasha or somebody does something, it's like they post like a Groiper. And I tweeted out something like, one day you'll see people wearing Balenciaga with Groipers on it. You know, like there's just like there's a big cultural lag. And I thought eventually you would start to see like people who are leftist posting like Trump gifs, and now you start to see it all the time. And I think that there's sort of like an aesthetic realignment, because in many ways, the sort of like technocratic people, like the Jeff Bezos, like they're not cool people. Like they, you know, like he said he was like Lizzo's #1 fan. He's not like watching, like these aren't people who watch like interesting movies or engage in like interesting theory. Now, the think tanks, on the other hand, I have a theory that like a lot of these kind of like centrist think tanks on both whatever Republican, Democrat, they do have some sort of like knowledge of Leo Strauss. Like I really do. I've done some research into that. They definitely but obviously like Nancy Pelosi or Jeb Bush, like they don't fucking know who that is, you know? So
interesting. So Republican art fag socialism is from all of that. Well, that's the background. That's the setup.
That's kind of the background, but I posted, it's so weird because it was just something I posted, and I was like a friend of mine, and she's like a girl. You would say an art thought, not to be, but she liked the term too. So she's like, why don't you just post that of a picture of us? And so I did, and people really liked it. And like all these people were like, what is this thing? And you know, you're the first person to remind me of that, because I completely forgot that was like a thing because I had set out to do something like that here, because you know, one of the things I like about Texas is, you know, the unrestricted gun laws. That's another thing, because I'm like, oh yeah, I can finally buy stuff I couldn't buy other places like legally. And
so when I hear Republican art fag socialism, to me it suggests, well, Republican meaning basically just kind of conservative, art fag meaning, you know, you're kind of like hip and like kind of stylish in a way, but it kind of in the more like not like the alpha male kind of way, but more the, you know, like chill dandy. That's right. Good word. Yeah. So it's like basically conservative, kind of hipster dandy. And then but also socialist, like you're interested in, you know, community and more egalitarian kind of politics in a way, just not the woke shit.
Yeah.
So it's basically like culturally conservative, kind of like Oscar Wilde dandy-esque, but like socialism.
But culturally conservative is so nebulous, because there's a whole thing about like, well, what's more Lindy, and you can trace these things all the way back, and it's like to me, Bataille, you know, I actually was reading this text that was like talking about Bataille and Jacques Lacan as like sort of like revolutionary conservatives, sort of in the same vein as Ernst Jünger and Ernst von Salomon and people like that. And it was really weird, because I was always like, why is Bataille and why were Bataille and Mishima close friends? And to me, it makes plenty of sense. And they called something like, and as you kind of coined the term, reactionary leftist for Deleuze. And I see the same thing. It's like, you know, there's this whole meme that's like shows like Karl Marx versus like Ronald Reagan, right? And it's like Ronald Reagan, like total like expansion of like the neoliberal, it's not even a system neoliberalism, but it's also like anti-gun, you know, speech restriction. Karl Marx, I mean, if you're looking at if you care about the dialectic in any way, well, you need to be anti-censorship, and you need something to safeguard censorship as well. So you could almost say that like Marx was somewhat a First and a Second Amendment absolutist.
He was just straight up reactionary in many ways. Yeah, we were talking about this the other night. Yeah, totally.
So, in my opinion, I think that there's a sort of like political aesthetic realignment that's taking place, but it's almost like crushed because politics is like no one's even paying attention right now. Like CNN, I think their ratings are down 44% since Trump left office. And I mean, to me, like, I just see all this as like funny.
Yeah.
You know, like to me, it's not like, obviously I don't want to be like a nihilist and say that like politics don't have actual material and spiritual and metaphysical ramifications because they're huge. Like I'm not like Kantbot, for example, who just reflexively says none of this exists, none of this matters. Like it clearly does matter. And so that's kind of where I'm with.
Yeah, I hear that. So Ben, do you want to grab the pillow that Barrett brought? I still don't understand why he brought a pillow. It's in the dryer. I want to hear the story of the pillow.
I'm going to get in trouble. If
you got it,
I might get put on the no-fly list for owning this pillow because the guy, he was a crackhead to CEO.
All right, yeah. So what is this pillow?
It's a My Pillow, but I wanted to try it out, and it's the CEO was a kind of like a big Trump supporter, but he was also an ex-crackhead. And you have to activate.
Is there something special about this type? Is it like a special design? It feels like it's filled with like packing peanuts or something.
Yeah. It's like,
is that how it's supposed to feel?
Yeah, it's like activated by air.
All right. So this guy used to be a crackhead and then made a pillow company. So why did he make a pillow company? Like where
I think he owned a bar in a small town in Minnesota, and he was a crackhead and he got sober, and now he runs all these recovery houses. But David Hogg, the sort of like anti-gun activist from the Parkland shooting, whose dad's like CIA agent.
Yeah.
Coincidentally, now I'm getting like Alex Jones.
No, it's okay. I'm kind of friends with Kyle Kashev, the like conservative kid from the Parkland shooting.
Oh,
he and I we DM. We're like friendly. I don't know why exactly, but he's like basically the arch nemesis of David Hogg. They're kind of they're like left and right wing versions of each other. In any event. So this guy used to be a crackhead, then made a pillow company. Why was he recently in the headlines?
Because he was a Trump supporter and they stopped stocking his pillows places. Because, I mean, it's not about Trump because Trump's over. Like, whatever. That's not the point. The point is, like, I think a lot of people had this idea that things would get less censorious if he was gone. Because people were just like, oh, God, I just want him out of here. So, like, this, like, constant thing goes away. But it's like, no. They're just going to ramp this thing up. And things are going to get a lot less fun for a lot of people. So you have to find interesting cryptic ways to sort of, I guess you would say, like, subvert or just like fly under the radar, because now they're going through podcasts and looking for disinformation.
Right.
Now.
It's funny to me that the guy who owns this pillow company, and probably the pillow company is probably doing really well right now because they're in the news, but it's very funny to me how there's this weird thing going on right now where the craziest people are kind of doing the best in certain ways.
Totally.
Like I was actually just at a party last night, and this kid I was talking to, he had a great line, which he said spontaneously. He said something like, he's like, dude, over the next several years, the more retarded you are, the richer you're going to become. And it actually kind of makes sense. Like if you look at like the GameStop stuff, and also just if you think about Bitcoin and crypto more generally, like the people who got the richest so far off of crypto are like the sketchiest people who like 10 years ago were like just selling drugs and guns and shit like that. It's almost like the sketchier and weirder and more fucked up and retarded you are, the more you're going to thrive in the near future. The way the world is going.
No, it's 100%.
Like this guy was a crackhead, like now probably has this like fire pillow company. Like it's gonna be like this.
And that's his book.
You can do sharing.
It's From Crackhead to CEO.
Share down there.
No, but to me, I think that's great. It's kind of like in Pasolini.
Yeah, movies. Dude, it's boon times for retards.
No, it is. News. No, it really is. Like, I mean, I'm shocked. I started this whole project of mine, because it's not really a podcast, because like I make music for it and I like do music stuff, and we've done it live. When I was doing live events, it was partially, I see. They're like, that's a Japanese. That's Spanish. Oh, I can't read. That's hilarious.
Oh, he wrote a book, that guy?
Oh, yeah. He wrote What Are the Odds from Crack Addict to CEO.
Fire. I will totally watch that.
It's a book, so you'd have to read it. But I see him as interesting. And the girl I'm dating, her grandparents have a life-size cutout of him, apparently.
Really? So he's like well known in certain circles and admired, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the kind
Dude,
of
he'd probably come on the podcast. I bet. Didn't he get kicked off Fox News? Like that was the recent thing that happened, right? They brought him on Fox News or some news site, and then they basically asked him a question about what happened, and then he started talking about how the election was rigged.
Yeah,
and then they cut him off immediately.
Yeah.
You might be able to find the clip if you want to, but it's kind of old news now. I feel like
no, it is.
Yeah,
I think it's just sort of. I mean, it's a really strange time because in my mind, here's this guy. I look at his logo, and it's got this like 70s. It's like you cannot take this person seriously.
It does
as
have
a
70s vibes.
actor in any like.
Dude, I feel like these pillows come like prepackaged with like cocaine stains and like cum stains and shit.
Yeah. Oh, totally. But that's why it's interesting to me.
Yeah,
it's like people are choosing to not read this moment. But like unreading is probably the greatest disservice you can do to yourself, and you're gonna miss out on a lot of shit. Like you were talking, like I didn't have like I played in music and I was like playing in bands, and now I'm like, oh yeah, I guess like my podcast is doing kind of okay, and people are like paying, doing it's totally strange. It's like the world is because I think people are just people want representation so bad, and it's really hard to like go towards the outside. I think we were talking about this sort of like neo-rationalist speculative realist philosophy school, which I went to a school and was like taught by some.
Yeah, let's actually go over your story real quick. Let's do like a TLDR of your story, because you fucked with like kind of like philosophy, academia a little bit, and then you were also in like music scenes and stuff. So give us like the TLDR of like your basic narrative.
Well, my basic narrative was I was like a guitar retard, as Dasha calls me, a guitar autist. So I just played in bands, and I had my own business actually, like working on, buying and selling stuff and repairing shit. And I was
in LA.
Yeah. And I was like a decorative painter, and, I was like doing fine, but the whole thing was like, everything just started to feel wrong to me at a certain point. Like nothing, like all the things, like that place, that outside, like a lot of the music I would listen to, like Rocky Erickson or Jandek, I was always looking for that. Like ever since I was a kid, I was always looking for that untouched, underrepresented, like the thing that lacked representation. Those were the things that were most interesting to me. Like the things that were more overlooked. And I found like, I just found them to be more interesting. And at a certain point, I felt like all sort of cultural production, obviously Mark Fisher talks about this a lot, had been sort of codified. And it's like, well, how do you get outside of that? Because I can't do it in music, because I'm sitting in like a tour van, like having to hide like Fang Numina from people in like 2015. And like, I'm reading CCRU stuff and Deleuze and like Mark Fisher and all these people, like the fucking retards in my band were just like, duh, what is that? Like, I like boobs and beer. And I was just like, don't worry about it. Just don't even think about this stuff. Like, so I got progressively more interested in theory, and I'd been interested in it for a little while prior to that. I was into Bataille and Baudrillard and people like that when I was 19. So I had like a kernel interest in, I guess you would say, 20th century French philosophy in particular. And then it just started expanding to a broader canon of critical philosophy. And then, I was like, well, what if I merged cultural production? Because the art world does a really, really bad job of they co-brand. So what they do is they take the sort of like less rigorous contemporary philosophers and they use their name as sort of like a way to signal like, hey, we know what we're talking. Like a lot of this art speak,
totally.
It's first off, it's just like bad writing and total fucking nonsense. But second off, they're like name dropping Bernard Stiegler and all of these people.
Totally.
And I think that a lot of philosophy, and I'm a big Francois Laruelle fan. He's kind of my number one guy right now.
People tuning into this live stream, like in the middle of it, are wondering what the fuck is this big white pillow doing on the table. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, no, it is
not bad, but it's kind of funny.
But I think the part of the issue is that philosophy takes itself, especially now, especially with like the para-academia stuff, it takes itself seriously as something that goes beyond the reaches of like a creative intellectual practice, and believes in things like I can be a lapdog for the hard sciences and this sort of.
Right. You know what it is? I think there's this weird thing where continental philosophy used to be this kind of radical anti-establishment ethos. But then what happened was the internet came along, and then you had real radical outsider anti-establishment people. And so then like the people who are invested in a kind of academic institutionalized critical theory or radical philosophy now are in this awkward contradictory position where like if your career is all about institutionalized academic philosophy, even if you're into like radical philosophy, you basically have to fend off the actual radical outsiders who are like snipping at your heels.
Oh, completely.
But you're also, your whole brand is criticizing the establishment also. So they're kind of fucked basically.
But at the same time, you know, you have sort of like an open embrace of establishment modalities. Like Benjamin Bratton is like a total, I mean, he came from Yahoo. You know, he worked in tech.
Isn't he like a Russian asset or something?
I mean, basically with the Strelka Institute, but
what's that all about? Do you know?
It's like his architecture. But the thing is like the Strelka Institute, I looked into it, and it's a lot of this stuff is you're engaging in an aesthetic project. This is a project of signaling and aesthetics, and it's completely like this whole thing about terraforming.
He's a good example of what you're talking about. That's right.
Yeah. So and I troll him a lot, and I don't like to troll people because I think it's mean.
Because he presents himself as if he's a kind of like almost like an engineer who wants to kind of like help actually design functional systems.
Yeah.
But the actual content at the end of the day is art.
Yeah, basically, which is why he ends up doing the majority of his engagements in art museums and not, you know, he's not like at these sort of these like hard natural science institutions. And and
I'm not even throwing shade. Like he seems like a smart dude. I would gladly have a beer with him. I'm sure I would like him. But I think the structural position of the particular game he is playing is in a dicey spot at this moment in kind of the history of technology and culture. Yeah. Because, you know, I think he's a very smart guy, but he's kind of playing this game where it's like he has to posture as this kind of like scientifically sophisticated, serious operator who's proposing real plans that like governments should pursue. But it's mostly a LARP because he has like no actual like relevance or power in those circles.
They don't even know who he is.
And he's really just making ideas and products that are really only functioning or circulating in the art world is all I'm saying. Yeah,
basically. Yeah. And I think it's important to sort of, and a lot of these people, like I wouldn't care if they were more forthright, but they always do it at the expense of like the continental or epistemology, like Reza Negarestani, you know what I mean? Like the people like that, like Reza Negarestani or whoever. And, you know, I know I'm talking a lot of shit right now, but I don't really.
No, that's what podcasts are for.
Well, no, but
also, by the way, I invited Reza on the podcast many times, and he basically has ghosted me. So, no disrespect, Reza, but I understand. It's all good, man. But you know, we're not going to throw shade unnecessarily on people. But like, no, you should say whatever you think. You know.
Well, here's the thing: is so. Basically it's like I got disinterested in that whole world because, you know, I was like a student of some of these people. Like I was.
Right. You were working with them. You were taking their classes, right?
Yeah. And I did like a presentation with Ben Bratton and like,
and because you were at the New Center or what were you?
I went to the New Center.
Which for people listening is the kind of para-academic online system of classes.
Yeah.
You can kind of get credits for it. But it's also very much kind of on the outside.
Right? Yeah. And it's pretty inexpensive. And
they did have Nick Land teaching courses until they canceled Nick Land and kind of, I think it lost a lot of credibility on the real like outside, you know, but.
Well, so I think at a certain point, a lot of that stuff I started losing interest in that too, because it you know, the foundation started crumbling.
Well, yeah, once you cancel Nick Land, then you're not actually interestingly para-academic. You're not interestingly outside. You're just basically a weak, non-influential satellite of the establishment, basically.
Well, the thing that I found to be not necessarily that about the canceling of Nick Land and letting him go, because I've heard conflicting stories about it being some other reasons that had nothing to do with that. But but I will say that there is an issue when I think people sort of take the rigor of what they proclaim to be doing too seriously. And again, this is why like I do like Derrida and Laruelle's, because they're trying to basically pull the mask off of like a lot of this stuff and be like, none of this is really that serious. And you don't have to take it that seriously. And a lot of it is just animating itself. And because all they're doing is they're explicating phenomena that would happen whether or not their theories exist. Their theories are basically totally inconsequential to like influencing any of the phenomena that they're somehow discussing. And to me, like, I'm like, you're not being funny. You sound like a nerd. Like, you're fucking lame. Like this, like what is this?
Right.
And it's like, I don't want to reduce the entirety of their endeavors to just clout chasing and branding, but essentially,
you would reduce it to clout chasing and branding.
Well, that's why I'm more interested in like, Republican art fag socialism and manic pixie dream girls. And I'm more interested in other things, like things that are like novel and funny and honest and that actually like give you something and give other people something.
Totally. I think the reason we like to make fun of people like Reza and Benjamin Bratton is not out of disrespect or cruelty or anything like that. It's more like a loving kind of like, I want people like that who I know are smart and interesting and creative. I want them to actually cut loose and maximize their freedom and potential in this new world where on the internet you can actually get really fucking creative and have real effects on people that are that you in a way lose control of and that aren't even like. So to me, this is the really kind of post-Deleuzian kind of like way to think about. And a lot of these people are essentially post-Deleuzian in the way I think about it.
They don't like to admit it.
Yeah, like what Deleuze really, really intuited, I think, better than most people, is that the digital revolution was creating these new opportunities for basically manufacturing novel and creative linguistic systems that would become machines of their own, that could take on lives of their own, which would not be beholden to this kind of oppressive historical game of like philosophical competitiveness and one-upsmanship, but that actually with philosophy, you could create these fundamentally novel machineries that you participate in with the people around you, and that then kind of diffuse out into the world in unpredictable and interesting and effective ways. Yeah. To me, that's like one way to just summarize in a somewhat cartoonish way my mental model of kind of post Deleuzian philosophy should look like. I think he was really trying to help us see that. Yeah. And in a lot of ways, like these people like Benjamin Bratton and Reza and these kind of, somewhat interesting para-academic types of philosophers, they could be doing that, but they're still too invested in these institutions in which they're pretty much just peasants. Like this is something, and again, I'm not like throwing shade. It's more like for people out there listening who don't necessarily understand the levels to kind of academic prestige. Like people like Reza, they're total peasants in the world of institutionalized philosophy. Yeah. But they're also not relevant or interesting or successful on the internet, particularly because they're not willing to go all in on the internet. So it's like they're still beholden to this old crappy game.
They're
right?
pretty successful on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, how many people do you think have read Reza's last book?
Intelligence, INS? Well, it's hard to say.
I think if you could see the data, it would be pretty depressing.
You think so?
Yeah, dude. I think these kind of semi-academic institutionalized imprints like Urbanomic are vanishingly small in terms of their reach and the numbers that they're doing. And I'm not throwing shade again. It's just like that. That's always been a fact.
I thought Jason Mahage's Omnicide was amazing.
Yeah,
I think because he's a comparative lit guy, and I saw him actually do a sort of debate with Thomas Monahan, who's like a urbanomic.
I know him a little bit from back in the day.
Yeah, like neo-rationalist guy.
He's a nice guy, smart guy, definitely.
Yeah, he's smart. I mean, he's got an Oxford Dictionary grasp on language. Which is a game in its own right. But Jason is just one of those people who he's sort of like an influence on me, just because he cuts through all the bullshit. He's just like, I'm not a Marxist. I think a lot of the shit is stupid. He told a really cool story that I really, really liked, and it goes to sort of like the Deleuzian like line of flight theory. He was like, I had a teacher who told me. He said, I had Heidegger's Being and Time and I had Bataille in the other hand. And he's like, you can't read both of these right now. And he tells a story. He's like, why? He's like, because if they met in an elevator, they would kill each other. So you have to pick one. He's like, which one? Pick one. He's like, I picked Bataille. And he's like, all right, good. And he takes the Heidegger book and he throws it in the trash. He's like, you don't need this anymore. And he's like, and from that point on, that was what guided me towards my interest in the sort of like arcane and the mystical.
Interesting.
And he's like, not that I didn't eventually go back to that and read some Heidegger, but it was like to me, I was kind of the same way. Like I had no interest in phenomenology. It wasn't interesting until I got into later Derrida. And then it made me want to go back and sort of like read, Merleau-Ponty and even Husserl, who's so fucking boring. I mean, he generally breached like novel philosophical territory.
Totally.
I think. Even though, but it's like a long route to a shortcut with him. But because of that, so much blossomed from that. Even though he's like the most boring fucking person,
incredibly boring, but incredibly important insofar as like basically the founder of phenomenology.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to get too philosophy talk here because I want to talk about like
BPD chicks on Instagram.
Yeah, BPD chicks on Instagram. That's always a fun
Quirked Up Whodies.
Speaking of Heidegger, they mentioned Heidegger a couple.
I only want to hear it if it's good or juicy.
And
they
said
fun.
I like land and mold bug. Oh yeah, well so we did the mold bug event too. And that's how we met.
That's right.
And to me, that was a really successful moment because not only did it defang Curtis Yarvin, and like I've never been a big Yarvin fan. Like I'd read his stuff. I'm like, why do you always side with the bad guys? I never thought he was like a racist or anything like that. And it turns out like he's a really fucking nice guy, and he's just super normal. And now he's like doing the rounds, and all these people like think like, oh, it's so cute. They're not like he doesn't set off like Google security alarms anymore.
We did that.
And it was
basically
done. Yeah. And it was done at this Dutch soldier society that was like falling apart in LA. So like, imagine all this. And then like, I don't know if I could say who the guest who was sitting there, and there were like art girls there. There were quirked up art girls in the audience. There were like tech bros.
It was surreal.
Venture capitalists. There was
it was
like
surreal.
Peter.
We try not to name drop around here, but it doesn't matter.
I'm not going to say it. Yeah. I'm not going to name drop, but I will say like the sort of fusion of all these different people was like completely insane.
It was fucking so cool, dude. It was like, dude, honestly, and then the pandemic hit. So like all of society was shut down after that. But basically ever since that event, I was so fucking convinced from that between me, you, like our little clique, it absolutely convinced me that we are sitting on this like powder keg of cultural futures. And I don't know what it is exactly. I don't know where it goes exactly. All I know is it's a fucking powder keg and it's fucking awesome. And ever since then, I've been just laser focused on how can I build this out bigger and better. And once we're allowed to fucking move around society, make it like blow back up. And that's what we're going to do in Austin.
I mean, I hope so. And I hope people like it.
Ben, who are you on the fucking phone with, dude?
I'm spreading the word.
Oh, you are?
Yeah.
Okay, good work.
Nice.
I thought you were texting with e-girls or something.
I mean that too.
You're supposed to be working, dude. You're supposed to be manning the machines.
No, man, I'm getting all the e-girls
I'm just fucking with you. Yeah, one of my goals, folks, is to find Ben, my assistant, an e-girl to shack up with. No, how dare I say that? That's sinful to get married to. Yeah, to shack up the legal, legit way, not living in sin. I would never support Ben living in sin, but I mean, I've done it myself, so I can't throw shade. But yeah, so if you're a hot e-girl out there, you want to come to Austin, meet my assistant Ben. I'm accepting applications. Anything good in the chat? Let us know if there is. Right. So, but basically, you kind of got canceled, right? Do you want to tell that story a little bit? Because you were in this world of like para academic, kind of New Center, kind of hip philosophy circles.
Yeah, but nobody at New Center did that.
Oh, so it wasn't that okay? But you were kind of in like left wing groups and stuff.
Yeah, and it's not really. It wasn't really a cancel situation. It's more people limiting the things that you can do. So it's almost like you pre-limit yourself by being super in one way.
Okay.
It almost was like, it's like a limiting thing, which is great. Cause I'm like, fuck these nerds. Like, why would I hang out with these fucking,
who are you referring to?
School marms? Like
New Center or what?
No, not New Center. No.
So who were the people?
It was actually I think it was before New Center. You know what? Mo from New Center has always been great. He's
a nice guy. I've talked to him. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it had nothing to do with New Center people. There was never any sort of, they're totally for free anything. Like
unless you're Nick Land.
But
yeah, sure.
maybe.
Sure.
But not even him. But
well, wait, real quick. There's an alternative theory of why they canceled Nick Land. Can you say it or?
Well, it would be too disparaging on a personal level.
You can skip it.
It doesn't.
Okay, no
it
pressure.
Doesn't have to do with ideology or,
okay.
or theories or.
You can skip it. Up to you. No pressure. If you think it's inappropriate, whatever.
So yeah, I don't want to get into like personal.
Cool. Then
stuff.
go. So you're mixing with what groups now?
Well, right now it's not really a group because I feel like I've just sort of found myself. Like I started this project.
Oh, I'm sorry, not right this moment. I mean, in this part of the story when you're talking
about. Yeah. So it's basically like a left-wing group that said it was accelerationist. And they're like, oh, we're doing a book reading of Mark Fisher. And I'm like, oh, well, I like capitalist realism or whatever.
This is in LA.
And this is in LA. And
what was it called?
I just don't even want to get into
okay, fair enough.
Because it is just, it's too gay. I just,
really?
I just don't even.
Was it actually gay, like butt fucking for the future or something, or was
no? It was like it.
Oh, Joel! Shout out to Joel. What's up, Joel? He's our buddy, other member of Indie Thinkers, who's out in LA.
Yeah, well, I actually met him at this group, and so it's just one of these things where like I thought it was one thing, it didn't turn out to be that one thing, and then they accused me of doing something that I did or thinking a way that I didn't think. Like I think their invective was like they called me like a racist. I'm like a totally not racist. I'm not into HBD. I don't like any of that stuff. I don't believe in it. I think it's totally reductive, reducing people along these kind of like these lines. I don't see any point in it, and it's
you're also part indigenous Alaskan.
Yeah,
right?
I am. My half my family's in American Indian activism, right. So that's like another thing you can't really. I don't look like
you're pretty pale though. Yeah,
I am. Yeah,
you look like an Irish Mick like me.
Yeah. No, I know it's yeah. So I just sort of found it to be, and eventually after that they like. People got mad and apologized because they're like, oh, but that's not even what Barrett is. I'm like, have you missed all the like jokes I make that just say like call things like gay and retarded and like,
it's like, dudes, you canceled me for the wrong thing.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, and I just say that stuff because I grew up saying it and I think it's funny, and I don't want anybody to tell me what I can't say that I said when I was 12 years old that like. My 7th grade teacher didn't even get mad at me for.
Dude, notice by the way that retard is totally mainstream now thanks to GameStop. GameStop made this like they really put
based retards.
Yeah.
It's no longer ableist. And I also feel like there's also this I feel like there's sort of a people are accepting this they've come to accept this idea that the only people who use the word retard are people who are like on the spectrum anyway. So it's like you can't be ableist if you're autistic and you call people retarded.
Yeah, my friend Diana Fleischman has the best argument on this point, where she likes to point out that actually retarded people don't really understand if you're insulting them or what you're really trying to say. So like if you're hanging out with someone who has Down syndrome and like you use the word retard, the person who has Down syndrome isn't going to mind. Like they're really not going to care. You know, it's a good point, isn't it? I mean, it's basically true.
No, it is. They're not even aware of it.
Yeah.
If you say,
yeah.
No, it's funny. I mean, I remember that Black Eyed Peas song. Like, it's like a huge song, and they're like, "Let's get retarded." Let's get retarded.
What year was that?
It was like I don't know, like 2002. But somebody posted just like this song, like all the lyrics, and it's just like this is retard. The entire song is just like retard. It was like a #1 hit song.
Funny how the winds of fashion change.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow, they changed the lyrics here.
they changed the lyrics on like Rap Genius. That's hilarious. Really?
Like they probably changed Ariel Pink's pitch. They changes Pitchfork. You know, it's funny because Pitchfork music panned
The N-word, but they get rid of retarded.
Wow. That's incredible. Well, that scene, yeah. It's funny because actually Ariel Pink, I remember Pitchfork, like, which is increasingly irrelevant. There's no music journalism, just doesn't exist anymore. They gave all of like Ariel Pink's early albums like 2 stars. They're like, what is this shit?
Like when they first came out?
Yeah, when they first came out,
Oh, wow.
they gave like John Mouse's albums like 4.3, and then years later they revised them because you can do that on the internet to be like, you know, 8 or something, or they sort of like revised them, and there was this whole thing like they're like, oh, so they're not doubling down on their initial review process. They're changing the review, the scores as they go. And now I'm like, well, are they going to change it back to a 3 or something?
Wait,
like
so
that?
you're saying they go back to old records and they change they change their rating?
Yeah, they did
for
it
things that came out like decades ago.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah,
I didn't even know they did that.
yeah. So
That's kind of sleazy,
it
right?
is.
Because it's like
it feels sleazy. It's
if you're a genuine art critic, you should stand by your judgments over time, right?
Yeah,
it should be
exactly.
set in stone, right? You should not be allowed to go back and change the record of what you thought something was.
Yeah,
That's actually really interesting. I did not know that they did that.
Well-
think corrected. They actually did keep it in the lyrics. I guess it's
Okay.
a lot less than I thought. Because they say like started and then they go down to retarded and then it's like
Yeah.
ret.
Wow.
no, it's
They're
funny.
doing fine. They're doing fine.
Yeah,
That's kind of funny though.
it is funny. No, that's yeah, no.
Right. Okay. So you're in this group in LA and with people like Joel, shout out to Joel. And
soft canceled by the same group.
right. You both basically got canceled more or less. No, sorry. No.
I you know, I don't like saying that because part of me doesn't feel like it exists. It's a limiting. Because
I know what you mean, dude. I feel like that too. Sometimes people talk to me like they'd say that I got canceled. I'm like, I didn't get canceled. I was like,
did you? I mean, let's
was
put it this way.
yeah.
Like, if you're chaining yourself to the Twitter headquarters with like a Star of David type of thing, as I do feel like as these corporations merge more with the state, you're starting to see something that looks a lot more actually like fascism. I think it's funny because it's like my credit card like providers aren't denying me anything.
Right.
It's just I'm such low hanging fruit. It's so to even say that it's like basically a bunch of lame people with bad ideas who would years later come to find out that their ideas are wrong, you know, sort of like summon some like tiny little egregore to say that like I'm no longer welcome in a space. It's like, great. Well,
good.
fine.
You're not welcome in my house anymore, motherfuckers.
Yeah. So to me, it just doesn't. It doesn't.
It's
really,
like, okay, I'm going to go on and do cool things. I'll let you guys have your shitty little group.
Yeah.
It's like, thank you for the blessing. Like,
Yeah,
I feel like I wasn't canceled. I was like given the reward of freedom.
Oh yeah.
And like saved from wasting my time on like sinking institutions.
Oh no, 100%. And I think, and part of the thing that I want to impart to people is that like you can actually do this. Like, I mean, I'm making some money just doing stuff. It's like I have like all kinds of like weird little things. You have a lot of hustles, and obviously you're doing a lot of stuff. I mean, but I've adopted some of that too, just because that's kind of like what I've always done. Like I've always just, no part of me ever wanted to like punch a clock or do anything like that. So I had to find other ways to like, you know, get good with creating, be resourceful.
And so how long has the Contain podcast been running now?
You know, it was weird because I started it started kind of as a music label to release albums and do like physical releases. And then I was just kind of like, then we did some like pop-up events where we talked about some people who I was interested in. And
was that like 2 years ago or what?
No,
1 year?
It was like a year ago or something like that. And well, the podcast started really not that long ago. It started probably in March or something like that was when I started actually doing it.
Okay.
Well, I did 2 episodes before that, but they were just to throw up. And then the pandemic hit. I was like, all right, we're going to have like this new sort of like quasi mystical experience where like things, because when the pandemic first hit, everything felt like, oh, there's going to be new religions and new metaphysics, which kind of happened in the form of QAnon.
I don't think many people had that feeling though. Like I think you probably did.
I had a feeling that like this sort of like internet cults would sort of prop up.
See, the pandemic hits and normal people just get depressed and feel sad. But my friends have an immediate intuition that new religions are going to arise. I
was like, oh, there's going to be new eschatologies and new religions. And this is the problem people don't understand about QAnon is like, they're like any religious group, like they're not interested. So when people on the left try to critique QAnon and say they're crazy, it's like, they're an eschatology. They're not looking at material benefits. They really don't care.
Right.
About
they're actually, people call them a conspiracy theory, but they're actually doing something way bigger and more ambitious that addresses the human soul and the human condition.
It's exactly. Yeah. And I think that people they've completely misread them. And this is the issue with the kind of like liberal sort of materialist minded people. And I think people on the left is that they're obviously all of their ideas are going to be recaptured by capital or whatever that is. Capital, obviously a term that existed. It's existed before capitalism. So I don't want to say that, not to get too fucking whatever, but I think that when you look at things along those lines and everything is sort of reduced to like this, you're just stripping things down to like a really sort of like normie bug ontology. You're fundamentally not going to understand the beauty of something like, and one of the things is
normie bug ontology. That's a liner. Got that down, Ben. That's good.
Yeah. So, I started going to QAnon rallies to sort of cover them to try to like figure out what was going on. And so I made the QAnon phenomena because at an early point, I was like, what new sort of, and Jason Mahage talked about this too. And I had a little correspondence with him too. And so
Is he Q-pilled?
No, I don't think so.
Are you Q-pilled? Would you say?
Well, no, not in that I believe I don't believe in any of it.
Okay.
I mean,
but
some of it might
you
be
appreciate
real,
what
I appreciate how quirked up it is. And one of the things I loved about QAnon is going to these rallies. It was like it was totally multiracial. And one of the things I was like, you see way more Black and Native American and Hispanic representation here than any DSA meeting by far. Mm-hmm. And to me, I was like, well, if these sort of like, if this sort of like cry to the heavens, if that's what's going to bring people together, like what's wrong with that?
Yeah, that's an interesting take, right? It's like if you really care about anti-racism and fomenting racial harmony and racial equality,
yeah,
you might actually need to support and invest in batshit kind of conspiracy theory based like community building, because it actually does bring people together.
It brings people together, and the kinds of people you would see brought together, and so you would see like Haitian women crying like literally to the skies. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was really like QAnon
Based.
really was it was like a sacrament, and people don't understand. Like they see like this quote unquote domestic terrorism thing. It's like they're not fighting. They're not trying to fight for a material thing. So whether you think that you disagree with them or not, because a lot of like I don't think Comet Ping Pong and Pizzagate is like real or any of that shit, but I definitely think that people have misread it. Just like people misread Alex Jones. Like to me, Alex Jones is like an artist.
Right.
And
totally.
like I see Trump as an artist. Like I
think just like they're not fighting for a material outcome, as you said, they're also not they're not trying to make logical arguments that convince you logically. Like they're just trying to do something different that kind of bourgeois intellectual types can't really understand. They actually can't understand it.
No, they can't. Yeah. It's not, the thing is it's not an alien logic, because they're merely just reifying all these kind of like religious, I would say maybe like quasi dualistic, religions of the past. Like there's like it's like Sufism or something in a weird way. And I think that, and so I had this really big interest, and a lot of people were like, oh, like you're giving them way too much credit. I'm like, I don't think so. Why is that giving them too much credit? Like what about me comparing it to these sort of, these kind of like cryptic Manichaean sort of religions is giving it credit? Because why? Because one of those things is somehow off roster to you and this thing isn't. Like, why can't you just read the present? Why can't you just like bring all these things into one thing? Right.
So you started your podcast about a year ago. It's called Contain. Links in the show notes. And how would you describe it though? Like I know it's hard to describe. It's very kind of zany. I think in one of your taglines, you describe it as surrealism. Could you just speak a little bit about how you see the podcast and like what you're trying to do with it?
Well, like I said, because I understand and I don't know if this is necessarily self-aware, but I do understand that like no information I can give anyone is going to practically help anybody. Like there's nothing you can gain from anything that I say that's going to like help you get a job or help you do anything. But the one thing that I do try to get at is that if you start to think about things and you start to see things in a different way, even the medium of podcasting, because I think about podcasting not as like a way of relaying information. Like, so I don't do introductions. I make most of the music that I use because I'm a musician, and I trick it out with like a lot of like weird effects and make it very hazy and just strange. And I get people, and one of the things I like to do is I like to get guests to say really bizarre things. Like you're talking about Young, like Dasha was actually talking about all this like esoteric shit on the podcast, which is not something that you would necessarily hear from her in particular, or, talking with Boom about Day Life Army cult. And I had a guy on who did witchcraft for the State Department in an effort to sort of like subvert the Russian government in Bulgaria and Ukraine. And so to me, it's not like, I'm not trying to get to any one thing. It's basically just building out like a cosmology for like me to just explore and for other people to explore, because it's like with podcasting, it's like, I don't expect anybody to sit there and drop everything that they're doing while they're working to like listen to something that I have to say. It's like, how do I just make whatever it is they're doing, how do I put them in like a slightly different headspace and make whatever else they're doing just like a little bit more interesting and a little bit more enjoyable? And maybe they'll think that this thing that they're doing is good, and maybe they'll think it sucks and they would rather be doing something else. But it's basically just, I guess you would say, just breaking that sort of like the ins and outs of whatever it is that you're supposed to do, and putting you in a different place so that you can alter. It's like a drug.
So
like,
that is awesome.
I see podcasting like taking drugs.
Totally. And I would love to hear a little bit more about how you do that. I'm sure doing this, like you've learned little tricks, probably ways to, disarm someone or make them feel a little like to enable someone to feel like they can start saying some wacky shit? Like, do you use music? Is that one of your powerful tools? Like, or what are your tricks for like how you do that?
Well, I use music after. So when we're doing it, it's all just through Zoom. I do it afterwards, and I do stuff like instead of doing a podcast that week, I'll do like a binaural inner sound tuning fork Popol Vuh kind of like jam using these kind of like frequencies that will
be the whole podcast,
and that'll be the whole thing, and I'll frame it like a podcast episode. But if there's too much going on in the news and there's just too much information, I'm like, well, this will make you like, so I have this whole formula. They're called de-cringe dehexing soundscapes.
Oh, wow.
And so I incorporate some of those into the actual podcast and a lot of stuff. And this is why I'm really into this sort of like new micro rap genre called hexcore, because it's like purely angelic, bit crushed. And I played an illegal show with these kids like 2 months ago. It was like one of the last things I did in LA called Actuel Jewel Set. And I played in this backyard, and these kids from the high desert, and they're like in the Blood Gang, and they're making, again, this is like QAnon shit. It's like purely angelic. Like they're taking.
What's it called? Hexcore?
It's called hexcore. And a lot of these kids are just like 16-year-old kids from like the hood. And what they're making is like the most bit crushed, extreme, angelic, hazy.
What does bit crushed mean?
It means it's like run through filters.
Okay.
Through digital filters that create their own sort of like strange artifacts that other people, but
can you find a song that
sounds
hexcore? I want
like
to hear.
Reptilian Club Boys are probably the most famous export of this genre.
Okay.
And so to me, like I see like hexcore and Artode, and I see QAnon, and I see all these things, and I'm like, what are the things that sort of just fracture the bug reality that we exist in?
Hey, Ben, so if you pause it, if you go to share screen, you just have to do Brave. You have to share the Brave tab specifically, and then it will, see the option up there? Yep. Select it, but then see down there, share audio. There you go. And that way people will hear the audio playing.
All right, here we go.
Just make sure it's actually sharing to the screen. So this is hexcore?
Yeah. But it gets a lot more extreme than this.
Just let it play in the background for a little bit while you're talking.
But yeah, but some of the things I've gotten people to say, guess. Like I got Ariel Pink said a lot of stuff on the show that I'm not going to repeat because he's going through his. I mean, it made it to Variety, and people quoted what he said on.
Maybe let me listen for a minute because it's hard to pay attention to you also. So I just want to grok this real quick. It's okay. I just want a little taste.
But there's like these demon sounds.
All right, let's talk with this part. Oh yeah, it's almost like chant, like.
Well, they're really into stuff like the Book of Enoch and
really?
It's like Hotep mythology.
Whoa.
Like they're really into the Kabbalah and shit like that. And
all right, you can nix it, dude. That's dope. Like interesting, at least. Very interesting. I wonder if we can find some people in Austin who fuck with this music.
I would hope so.
So they're very into themes of demons, and so like what
demonology,
the lyrics. What other kind of like lyrical content is it known for?
Well, it's the lyrical content is basically it's basic rap stuff. So it's like obviously like shit like I fucked your hoe, this and that,
mixed with demonology,
mixed with, like
the Book of Enoch.
Yeah, Book of Enoch. But it's usually like samples like there are all these samples that go through their songs like blood, darkness, come on to me.
Whoa.
And it's it's very, they use a lot of like, sort of like Judaic Star of David sort of iconography. It's very sort of like religious and not in a cult in a weird way.
Okay. And so going back to the main thread of the story, this is the kind of stuff that you're interested in with the podcast, and kind of blending in these types of weird musical currents with different guests, and kind of putting them into an almost like a trance-like state where they can engage in like creative dream-like delirium. And
I mean, like Ariel Pink said, I'll just repeat this. He said on my podcast, he wants Trump to fuck him in the butt. And then we all sort of riffed on that. We all were like, yeah, it'd be great. It's like, and that's, but the thing is like normal people will listen to that and that abhors them. Right. But they don't understand that like, this is a game, it's like, there's like a French surrealist group. They were kicked out of called The Great Game. And they were like this group of poets, and they would do stuff like ride their bikes and drink turpentine down the street. And they were pretty really, really extreme.
Ben, go get the turpentine.
But so
go get the turpentine. We have to up the stakes for the stream.
So I guess there is like I do have an interest in surrealism. And I think that there is this kind of like haze that I feel like when podcasts, because like people will just talk about politics or something like, and I don't really talk about that, because to me, it's like, I'm trying to get you into a place where like you can make your own decisions about that at a different time. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I at least want to make people aware of like the sort of like aesthetics of like strange patriotism, or like these sort of like weird things that you just, I guess you just don't find. Like I've done whole episodes on like the history of human sacrifice and blood rights, and so I just try to find interesting shit that I genuinely think is like erotic or beautiful or strange, and like not necessarily teach you anything, just be like people just say like, well, what the fuck is this?
In other words, art. It's art.
Yeah, it's just art. But I'm not trying, but I'm not trying to put on this front that I'm like some rigorous intellectual person.
Right. It's like you're optimizing for some kind of novel creative emergence to arise from the circumstances that
it's
you
very
create.
Deleuzian.
No, it sounds beautiful. And it's like, I've only listened to a little bit to some of the episodes just because I'm too fucking busy. I don't listen to enough. I don't listen to half the stuff I'd like to. It's not personal at all. But like,
I get it.
I know you well enough now, and I understand like your ethos enough that like the way I hear you, or the way I kind of put it is, there is underneath all of rationality a kind of delirium. This is something Deleuze talks about, and mostly gets it from Jung in large part.
Yeah.
We like to walk around as if we are these like highly polished, conscientious, agents with these highly worked out philosophies, but actually in the background, always animating our most rational and focused ideas are strange personae and demons, if you will, and angels, if you will, kind of attractions and fantasies, and delirium essentially is the bedrock of rationality. Is something I've taken from Deleuze, and I think he gets this from Jung in a lot of ways. And I feel like you're basically trying to kind of penetrate through these like rationalistic shells and armors that we wear to try to like actually be able to consciously surf the waves of that delirium or something.
No, because
which I like a lot,
because I think that you can't. I think it's inescapable, and I think.
Do you really want me to get that?
No, we don't actually have any turpentine. I don't think we have any turpentine.
Well, I like Deleuze through Jakob von Oakskill a lot too, in the way in which he talks about the sort of framing of things. And one of the things that Deleuze also talks about is he talks about taste, and how taste is basically the regulator of all concepts. So if you can take something that within whatever context is giving you a certain like taste of something, whether it's artistic or creative or aesthetic, or it's like, it's just on mark with whatever is like avant-garde or interesting, then you can somehow actually use that and regulate actual ideas. So it's so taste is a regulator of concepts and ideas.
Totally right.
And that's something Deleuze talks a lot about as well.
And especially if you're interested in kind of the politics of cultural influence and all of that kind of stuff, you'd much rather have some leverage over taste than leverage over rational ideas, because the rational ideas are downstream of the taste.
And almost everything is downstream from the taste.
And that's why you have art thoughts who listen to your podcast. Whereas I got a few probably, but not many. It's mostly kind of tech dudes and creators, like mostly men interested in like tech philosophy and kind of more nerdy shit like that. But your work definitely appeals more to like
a little
young,
bit more like
young hipster art girls,
and guys, but it's definitely a more like artsy group of people or whatever, but it's part of that is just because like I do all the like art and the visual stuff and the music, so I give it this sort of like aesthetic walkway that you can walk into. But then it's like people talking about like Trump butt fucking them or something like that, or it's like talking about or like just everything under the like internet cults to just anything strange to even like some philosophy stuff. I mean, I don't get too heavy into that anymore, but I definitely think that like there's I definitely think if you can create a pathway to those things, you can take people to places that they never really imagine, which is, I think, what makes Red Scare very potent, is because they have ideas that are regulated by these sort of like aesthetic values that people they don't normally associate these two things with, like they don't
totally.
And I think if you can take those two things, it's really hard to do, because first off, I think you get a lot of shit for it because you automatically ostracize yourself from all these people who will eventually try to circle back and be your friends later once you do the brave thing that other people are not willing to do. Because I get it, like people have, which is kind of why I'm against internet anonymity, because not only do I think it makes people really irresponsible, they don't have to be sort of beholden to the things that they say or do, because it has no effect on them. So they can just say anything that they want, which is different than QAnon, because these people are like, they take their masks off while everyone else has a mask on, they're off. So they're ready to go. They're ready to lose everything. And so I do think that you need to sort of put yourself in that space because it's fun. It's so much fun.
Definitely. And it's also just a huge part of what human life is and should be, the creative. It's basically the creative sphere.
Yeah.
Like one of the saddest things about modern civilization and modern kind of mindsets is that because we value so much essentially instrumental rationality, like the scientific rationality that lets us do kind of engineering shit that's practical. Yeah. We value that so much that people genuinely kind of forget how to even access that delirium that is in fact our birthright. Like the ability to dream, the ability to let one's mind wander and to say things that just, you're not really sure if they're true. You don't really care if they're true. You want to say them just because you want to say them.
Yeah.
It's fun to say them. It's weird. I want Trump to butt fuck me. It's just a fun thing. It's a weird thing to say, right? It's like you can use words in different ways. One way to use words is to try to make sense out of things and to engineer sophisticated systems that function. But there is another way to use words, which is just to play with them. And that's the domain of poetry and art and all of that, right? And it's like, we literally forget, like people are literally forgetting that that's a legitimate way to use words, that you can just string together words in ways that seem interesting to you. And that's all there is to it.
and well, that's why I like Simone Weil, and that's why I like reading later Derrida and Laruelle, is because there's so much repetition. You know, with Laruelle, it's always like it's the one. And with Derrida, the way he takes the same word and it's like, and so there's this whole, obviously like post-Marxism thing, and postmodernism is eroding society, but actually that's not true at all. What you're seeing is people who are very conservative thinkers take logos and ascribe very stationary meanings that are devoid of polysemy, but they're just rearranging the definition, but keeping it locked in this binary definition. And to me, that's like very uninteresting and very unpoetic. And there's like nothing interesting. And it's like, so like, not only does it rebuke the sort of rational mind, but it also rebukes like the poetic, dreamlike delirium state that we also should be accessing. So it really does put us in a bug place. It really is a bug ontology.
I like that.
I
love that. I should also say to people in my audience, the girls in my audience, the nice young women in my audience, I didn't want to marginalize you. I know I talk with people in my audience who listen to the show and like the show who are young women. So when I said before that, the majority of my audience is dudes, but definitely some women out there. And I didn't want to kind of like, erase you. In fact, Ben, actually, I was DMing with this girl today who is a nice young woman who reached out to me recently. She's listening to the podcast. And this was probably months ago. She reached out to me about wanting to get married to someone, because I've been doing this like arranged marriage agency.
Oh yeah,
and,
I want to hear about that.
We could talk about it if you want, but basically this young girl who reached out to me a while ago, she happens to be in Austin, so we were like chatting again. She like hit me up or whatever, and I was like, oh, you know what? I was like, I have a handsome young man who's single, who is, looking for a nice young Christian wife because she's Christian and he wants to get married. I was like, he's a good looking chap and a good character. And she basically said, oh, that's very nice of you. But now she's dating someone currently. So
great.
Unfortunately, yeah.
So,
No, I'm serious. One of my goals for the podcast in 2021 is to get big enough that I have enough like e-girl energy coming this way. I'm a happily married man. I don't fuck around whatsoever. I'm a happy, loyal married man, but I can kind of channel e-girl energy to you. If the podcast keeps growing, then I'm going to try to get you married.
That's great.
Not cheap dates, not cheap fucking. If you're looking for a cheap fuck, do not come to the Other Life podcast. I'm not going to let my assistant have any one night stands. If you're interested in getting married to a nice young Christian man like Ben, I'm happy to arrange this. I'm happy to give you a shot. DM me. I'll arrange a date. And but if you're looking for anything unwholesome, don't come my way, because I'm not facilitating that. So there you go. Yeah, Ben. Yeah, there you go. So what do you think? I think we're coming up on. We're in an hour and 15 minutes. Should we talk about some more shit, or you want to? We could go out. We could go out somewhere or do something else if you want. What are you thinking?
I'm cool to talk about whatever. I mean, I'm pretty much I'm cool with anything.
Cool. Well, I've generally been defaulting to the hour range, but I'm having fun. So.
I usually just talk for like way longer.
Any good questions from the audience, or nothing particularly thoughtful?
This is a result of neo-progressive thinking. This is gibberish.
No, don't just read random stuff.
No,
it's got to be either good or juicy, or they got a super chat if they want the clout of being on the show.
I think we're running an equivalency to what you're talking about with the eschatology of like wokeism. Like, don't you think that there's a woke eschatology?
A woke eschatology? Yeah. No, I don't see it as a real religion, because in order for it, because people say that like woke is a religion, and I do think that like they take a certain demographic of people and they treat them as deities, but it lacks that sort of like heaven angelic quality that sort of, I guess you would say, that underpins all kind of like religious found. Yeah, well, I mean, because let's put it this way. I think these people, again, I don't want to put myself in their place, but there's a certain psychology to where they're status signaling. This is a status game, and so they're reifying these sort of like religious tropes of like getting together and putting people on pedestals, proclaiming some to be saints and some to be sinners. But at the end of the day, it's all a status signal. Like there's no end point. There's no epoch, because at the end of the day, they're all atheists.
Right. I mean, I think you can make the case because I was in that kind of state of mind only a few years ago. I do think that there is some kind of sensibility in the super woke folks where they think like if we just keep doing this, somehow there's going to be equality. I do think there's a lot of cynicism and kind of like real deep disingenuousness, but on some level there is also a kind of hope or dream or faith. There is a kind of faith.
But it's
like
a faith in something that doesn't already exist. If you're a universalist and you're a Christian, you already see everybody as equal. Everything is cosmically equal.
I think the reason it's not an eschatology, or the reason it's satanic. The reason it's satanic, and I'll tell you why it's satanic. The reason it's satanic is because it has this kind of faith-like structure that I was just referring to. Like the super woke people, they don't have any mental model where they can show you how their kind of hysterical raving is going to actually produce equality in the world. Like they genuinely have no clue how that's going to work. But they are also not willing to say that it's essentially a religious faith, right? Because that's losers. Like only like losers are actually religious people. Right.
Like,
So that's the reason it's satanic. Is because like you're allowed to have kind of not fully rationally explained beliefs or hopes or faiths if you have the humility to put that on God and to say, I don't know how this adds up, but I believe in it, and this is where I stand, and I'm standing here anyway, even though I can't show it to you rationalistically. I have faith in it. That's okay to do, and that's good and wholesome to do if you say this is for the greater glory of God.
Yeah.
And this is commitment and submission to God. But when you have that kind of faith-like structure where you're like, I don't understand how this hysterical raving is going to produce racial equality in the world, but I just kind of think it is somehow going to. And also, by the way, there is no God, and humans have complete power and control to engineer societies however they want. That's where it becomes satanic, basically. Because it's like you're basically imputing yourself God. You're giving yourself godlike powers. So you don't have a rational, explicable model of what you're doing. You're essentially leveraging faith, but you're also saying the guarantor of that faith is yourself.
Well, it's very Gnostic.
In a way,
It's a sort of Gnostic dualist thing where it's like you have the perfects, which, if you look at like the Cathar Gnostic religion, they were very, persecuted, like many sort of Gnostic Christian faiths were. But, they always had this idea that there was like the perfect, and who's the perfect in the sort of woke sphere. It's like whoever they ascribe, but then it's like the perfect is almost like can do no wrong, right? It's like, but the perfect actually, it makes it like a more degraded, debased form of Gnosticism, because the perfects in these religions, they have to abide by an ascetic life while everybody else sort of like engages in debasing the world, because it's like nothing here is real. It's all smoke and mirrors. Therefore, we can like transgress and fuck people over and do whatever we want. And they've like ascribed this kind of like Brahmin caste system of like high priests. But the high priests are like, to these people, are like, a lot of them like smoke crack and shit. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's like the most low vibrational form of like neo-Gnosticism you can possibly find, and that doesn't even hold up.
Right.
So I mean, that's my
right. Any other interesting questions, comments?
Let's see. To Barrett, enjoying this convo. Can Barrett interview Adavan Korea on his pod?
You know who that is?
Oh yeah, I fucking love. Oh, Evan. Yeah, I'm actually putting out some of his music.
Really? Who is that? What?
He's my friend. He lives in Seoul, South Korea. He's hilarious.
Really? Is he a musician?
He's like
or what?
Yeah, he makes like beats and stuff, and he's like an internet artist.
Really?
And he's done some ghost production for like big K-pop people, but he's a really interesting guy.
Adavan.
Shout out. I'm trying to release some of his music through non-fungible tokens.
Oh yeah, right. We've been talking about that.
So I told him, I was like, look, I want to do something really weird with what you do, because but I've actually used some of his music. He's given it to me to put in podcast episodes, and there's a really funny video where he does like a bunch of Zizek samples, and it's just Adavan Korea, but
good name.
Yeah, but you go to his SoundCloud, go to his SoundCloud. He's yeah, he has a project called Athenian Marketplace.
Okay.
It's like hip hop beats, but it's like Captain Beefheart made them or something like that. I don't know how to describe it.
Okay, cool. Cool. Any other new questions?
Let's see. I completely agree that studies say woke is American realism.
All right. Well, folks, if you're watching this right now, please subscribe to the YouTube channel and then click the bell so you get future notifications. As you can see, I've built up this dope little home studio. I even painted the damn walls.
Yeah.
I'm like getting super legit with this, folks. So please subscribe to the channel. Click the bell so you hear the next time I go live with cool people. There's a lot of fucking badass people floating around me in my orbit in Austin. So I'm going to be getting them all in here. And yeah, it's going to be fun. And go check out Barrett's podcast. It's called Contain. You can find links in the show notes. And you can also just search for it. And you can find him on Instagram and places like that if you want to hit him up. He's a nice dude. You can say what's up. And also, of course, subscribe to the Other Life on the podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. So I think we covered a lot of ground. I mean, we live in the same area now, so we'll be back on here for sure. So we could talk about Gnosticism and all kinds of other shit some other time. I think. I think we should. I kind of want to go out. I've been in the house all day.
Oh man,
what do you think? I mean, if you got any final thoughts, you're just itching to get out on the
not
table.
Really. No.
Ben,
no.
what do you think so far? This is your first time helping me with a kind of in-person live podcast in Austin. You having fun yet?
It's incredible. Yeah.
All right.
Dream come true.
Awesome. Someone in the chat is asking Based Mansion when. It's happening. Mark my words. I don't know when exactly, but there will be a Based Mansion Austin. Without a doubt, it's going to happen. I would say very, very likely in 2021, but it's hard to plan right now with the coronavirus. But folks, it's looking to me like the coronavirus is going to be over like in the next month or two. I mean,
really?
vaccines. Yeah, I mean, vaccines seem to be. People like to talk about how bad the process is, but it's happening fast enough that I think we could be back into normal social action in like 2 months. It's quite possible if you look at the current rate at which the vaccines are being handed out. So yeah, we'll see. The thing with being in Austin is it's super hot in the summer, so you can only really do big events in either like March or April at the latest, and then in like October or November. So I'm not sure we'll make it for March or April, but there will be some kind of badass big event, and we'll invite all the internet thoughts and e-boys. Girls and guys alike, any of you wild whippersnappers out on the internet, podcasters, SoundCloud rappers, bloggers,
SoundCloud rappers. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. All of you we're going to bring you all out to Austin, Texas, and we're going to do an epic event like the one we did in LA. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, like I said, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to the podcast, check out Barrett's Contain podcast, and we'll be back on here sooner than later. All right. Any parting words from you?
No, that's good.
All right. Other Life podcast, bitches. Thank you.
Right.
Love you. Bye-bye.